People tend to like to change their minds in private. And that's, I mean, there's a kind of a faith-saving aspect to this, and there's just, you know, kind of the water on the rock process where you might not be the final moment that changes their mind, but you're part of a process. I'm always impressed, and I think we've talked about this as well, how few experiences I have where it's clear that someone came into a conversation with a very strongly held opinion, and by some process of reasoning, they, at the end of the conversation, totally disavow it. I mean, this is, I think I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
But you and I are just inundated with the testimony of people who have changed their minds on these core issues through some process, and then the process often entails reading books or hearing debates, so it's like watching seeing a supernova go off or something. I mean, they're going off all the time, but we're not seeing them.
A few years ago, there was a talk at one of the atheist conferences by a man. His talk was called "Don't Be a Dick," and he produced what he thought was an absolute slam dunk argument. He said, "How many of you in the audience, if somebody called you an idiot, would change your mind?" And of course, nobody would. But I felt that was a very unfair tactic, because if I tell somebody he's an idiot, and I don't do quite those words, but if the effect of what I'm saying is that he is an idiot, I admit I'm not going to change his mind. But if there are a lot of other people listening in, say it's a radio audience, I mean, you've probably done, I know you've done things where you're talking to one person who probably is an idiot, and yet you know that there are hundreds, thousands of people in the radio audience listening in.
Yep.
You haven't changed the mind of the idiot, but you've probably changed the minds of all the other people who are listening at the same time. And so this is...
It's precisely the situation that I deal with both on the atheist experience and off. I'm not necessarily trying to change the caller's mind, although I'm happy for that to happen. I'm having the conversation for all the people out there who agree, who would have used those same arguments. Because we know that on some occasions, if you can be shown to be wrong, people will sometimes double down, especially if they've made a public profession on behalf of something. This just becomes flat denial. But we also know that through, I don't want to go down the mirror neuron route because you'll probably correct me, but at least with respect to empathy, if you see someone presenting your arguments and they are humiliating themselves, not just, I'm not necessarily humiliating, they're humiliating themselves, this affects that individual who's watching in a way almost as if it had happened to them, and that yet they have the safety of not having been in public humiliated.
Yeah, I might be wired differently here, but I have a different reaction to being called an idiot. If there's
I don't think you're ever called an idiot. So.
Well, no. I mean, well, virtually so. If I guess the source is relevant, but if the source is someone who you find credible on other topics, and that source tells you you're wrong on topic X, that becomes very interesting to me. If Steve Pinker calls me an idiot, I'm very interested, and the offense really has nothing to do with it at that point. So it's more of a sourcing issue, because the people who tend to call you an idiot are usually disconfirm their authority.
When I was an undergraduate, I read The Phenomenon of Man by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and I was completely taken in by it. I thought it was wonderful. And then I read Peter Medawar Review of this book. Recommend. It's the finest negative book review ever written. Read it. And I finished this review and I said, "I'm an idiot." I was completely fooled by
that moment of awakening. I've talked before. It's not so much being wrong that affects people, because you think you're right. So it's not like anything to feel that you're wrong. It's the discovery that you're wrong that is sort of the testament of your character. Because for me, finding out that I was wrong is is joyous, not that I was wrong, but that I don't have to continue being wrong, that I've made this actual discovery. And there are, people who will write in will say, oh, Matt's wonderful on religion, but terrible on topic X. And without too much exaggeration, I could probably pull up 100 emails, and all of them disagree on what X is. Matt's right about everything except X. I want to get all of them together in a room so they can argue with each other, because every one of those X's is covered by somebody else.
You might be wrong about everything.
I am.
That's just compatible with the data.
At least I can't show that I'm not.
It's interesting psychologically that we all have this experience of being proven wrong, and that's interesting. But I'm more interested in what we do with this sneaking feeling that we might be wrong. I mean, that's psychologically and culturally, that is a far more well-subscribed state of mind, and it's, I think, very consequential. Because, well, obviously, when you're unequivocally wrong, well, then, I guess some people manage to ignore this, but there's not a lot to do. I think I just lost. Oh, there we are.
There we go.
But most of us, most of the time, live with opinions that are not so well vetted, and I think it's good to be skeptical of thoughts that come out of your mouth or hit the page, or that you find yourself affirming, which if suddenly a very smart expert in the relevant area stood before you and said, well, have you really thought that through? If you break out into a cold sweat at that point, it's worth sort of calibrating your conviction on those points, I think.